Neptune is the god of the waters. In exoteric astrology, it is often mistaken as the veil of illusion itself, triggering its associations with addiction, delusion, illusion, a sort of unconscious enmeshment with the environment, with feelings in that way we typically associate with some of the Piscean qualities. Esoterically, it is the ruler of the sixth ray, the sacred ruler, that is the higher octave thus of Mars, and speaks to the greatest potential evolution of the emotional nature into that of transpersonal love. It is thus the most mystical planet, so wherever it shows up in the chart for the soul-centered individual or the aspirant moving towards the solar life, it really speaks to a great, deeply personal, transpersonal spiritual urge, and brings about a beautiful, mystical and connected quality as that sixth ray focused point of the love quality. So if you want to learn more about the god of the waters and the Christ consciousness planet, keep watching. Some of the shadow qualities that we associate with Neptune really come from that being hidden by matter, the moon in this case. And this is where the urge towards universal connection, that emotional and personal love quality of Neptune, is veiled by really the lower qualities of Mars and the moon in this instance. Mars being the non-sacred ruler of the sixth ray and also having that connection to the emotional body or the solar plexus. So whereas Neptune speaks to that process of moving solar plexus into the heart, which is why it is called, by the way, the heart of the spiritual sun in its connection to Leo, which we'll come back to. Mars speaks to the polarization from solar plexus down, and so it rules the identification with the body and the illusory, Maya, deceptive desires that rise from consciousness being hidden through its blind identification with form. And so when Neptune is expressing through this Marsian way, we can still see those blendy qualities, but it's through those personal attachments, and this is where we get the associations with addictions or the fantasy or going off into the imaginative realm, because of course imagination or the dream state, these sorts of interior reflections, these sorts of active imaginations, which could be, let's say in the Jungian work, you could use that to expand or open up the personal psyche or something and tap into a different kind of watery creativity, or it can be used to dissociate and play into that escapism quality into a deluded astral dreamlike state and get away from the reality of life itself, right? So these are some of these shadowy qualities that can show up with Neptune, but really, esoterically considered, it is this deeply spiritually sensitive, transpersonal, the most mystical of all the planets. It has a strong connection to the second degree initiation, because that's the point where the individual really makes that sacrifice, which is also a key word for Neptune. It's the sacrifice into the solar life, the heart of the spiritual sun in this case, which is why this in Leo, the sun at the esoteric level veils Neptune, because when we elevate beyond the solar consciousness as it pertains to body identification and the personality and the animal body, it moves into the heart. That's the sixth ray process that Neptune really speaks to, of the elevating up out of Mars into the heart center. So even though it is connected to the solar plexus because it rules this elevatory process, it ends up taking one to the heart center. It is a sixth ray planet after all, right? Which is it's a love quality that we see there. So this connection to the second degree initiation really is speaking to the piercing of the soul into the emotional body. And this is why no matter how rational or logical or mental one has potentially been up until this point, when we cross into the second degree initiation, moving into Scorpio, there is this deeply emotional quality, and the need to serve humanity becomes one of a problem of love, a crisis of love. And this is why so many people who go through deep, personally heartbreaking experiences, whether it's some sort of loss, could be the loss of an intimate relationship, devastating heartbreak, or even just the quality of sensing human suffering and being really burdened by that. It's a very personal, emotional experience. When we take that pain to the core of itself, if we drive to the heart of our misery, our suffering, it takes us into this crucifixion. It's the crisis, speaking to this sixth ray process, or Mars and its connection to Scorpio here, the crisis of the two lives, of the dual lives, the crisis of my old desires and my Martian way of living versus the need to support, serve, and contribute to humanity. And this becomes a very emotional crisis, because necessarily for the soul to really take hold of the form, this is the second degree initiation, it has to penetrate it into the emotional body. It has to penetrate the astral form and start that process of purification, which is described by Scorpio and the battle between the selves and the regeneration of the astral nature. So this is why, even at the exoteric level, we see this connection with Neptune to artistry, music and creativity, and especially film, which I like, because film is really one of those multidisciplinary art forms, because you don't just have the visual, but you have the writing of the script and the screenplay and the music. It blends all of these different things. But if we think of, and the arts as well, music and film, one of the greatest spiritual functions of these art forms is the inspirational quality. And this is a very sixth ray word here, the inspiration to move into a sacrificial service. So this is why when people do go through mystical openings or deeply heartbreaking experiences that crack one open into a universal love, music can be a really powerful tool at this stage. We might be called to withdraw into that interior realm, and we listen to music and or even watch films that can inspire us or really speak to the personal pain of that individual experience of heartbreak. And we can see also the connection to Leo here, because Leo in its exoteric form is connected to artistry as well, the desire to create from the lower self, the personality self. But there's also that hidden Neptunian quality there, because when we move to the heart of the spiritual sun, that's sun veiling Neptune in Leo esoterically, it's that polarization into the true self, self with a capital S, the higher Leo, into the solar self, and therefore that which radiates out and creates from the solar self. So just another way in which that creativity of Neptune has that hint in Leo as well, and its connection to all the different art forms and things like this. So it is a very emotional and mystical experience, and the essence of the Neptunian experience, as well as the second degree initiation and the path of the mystic in general, is the merging with the universality. There's Pisces right there. This is the Christ consciousness. This is what Christ did. He was the living, walking sacrifice when he bore the sins of humanity. This is what Christ consciousness, or moving with Christ, or following Christ, following the path and the way, really means. It's to move with, you bear the cross of your own suffering, you go to the heart of your own suffering, and we see that plunges us into universal love for all of our human brothers and sisters, and the need to move our life into a living example of devotion and service. So this emotional love, the transference of the personal lower love, Mars, its desire, attachments, and the moon, the veil of matter, into that which is universal and deeply compassionate. And so this is why when we speak of, and this is a slightly separate note, but if we're struggling with inertia and a difficulty with moving along on the path, there's usually something that hasn't been sacrificed. Something needs to be meditated upon in the heart. Something of the Martian nature needs to be cracked open and lifted up to the heart center. That's once again the connection to Scorpio there, with Neptune, the god of the waters, penetrating the waters, the purification of the astral body, these sorts of things. Because a big part of reorienting towards the solar life is beginning to move the body based on the heart and the love center, versus the solar plexus down, which up until this point, the human being still primarily moves its vital energy through that identification with form. And so when we see the diseases of the saints and mystics that we've seen throughout history, this speaks to this difficult scorpionic process when we begin to reorient our lives towards this greater universal loving principle, and it triggers all of this unregenerated astral material, which can contribute to a lot of the other expression of inertia, which is really a consequence of the dark night of the soul and the healing process and all of this. Universal love, compassion, and sacrifice. The sacrifice, this is always the quality of that sixth ray. It's the sacrifice into universal love with Neptune, and for the sixth ray of Mars, it's the devotion of the body and the repolarization of the emotional nature, so that Mars is willing to become the living sacrifice, as a hint at the sacrificial lamb in Aries, right? So that which was the desire for incarnation into form in Aries lands into Cancer. And Cancer, by the way, ruled by the moon, speaks to this veiling of the form, where consciousness disappears into identification with form. And yet, Neptune is the esoteric ruler of Cancer at both esoteric and hierarchical levels. So Neptune in Cancer then speaks to this Christ-like quality, Cancer being one of the most Christ-like and loving signs, because it's really the mother principle in its greatest spiritual function. So in Cancer, we see the nourishment then of the universal human lives. And Cancer is often associated with nourishment, the physical needs of people to help nourish and support the body, as well as psychological needs, because necessarily our psychology is also connected to our physiology, those patterns of consciousness, as we've spoken about in making reference to, let's say, depth psychology and the Jungian work and the archetypes, for instance, the way in which our physiology and our psychology at the human form level has moved and evolved intelligently across time. Remember, Cancer is rays 3 and 7. So the sacrifice then of Neptune through Cancer is something like the same thing with Mars in Aries, in the desire to incarnate into physical form, landing in the next cardinal sign in Cancer. But then through Neptune, it's something like the spiritual principle, the heart of the sun, the spiritual sun, which is what Neptune is delving into matter and the substance of the mother. And in its spiritual expression through Cancer, it's that which universally loves the entirety of the human family, as we spoke about more generally with Neptune and also in Pisces, but it plays out in that desire to bring the needs and nourish the needs of humanity. And so when we talk about protecting and nourishing the human form, this is the mother quality once again, making sure that people have everything they need. Strong spiritually oriented Cancerians have a lot to do with giving people what they need: food, shelter, these sorts of things, but also psychologically speaking, Cancer quite prominent, as well as the moon and Neptune often with depth psychologists. So those who can disappear into the god of the waters, which is the other name for Neptune, the god moving in the waters of substance, but the way in which we bring the waters, the psychic waters of substance, into cohesion with the undercurrent of the love principle, which always brings things into wholeness. Whereas if you're psychologically fragmented, it's like, things are in the unconscious and there's fear, and that's part of this Cancerian sensitivity in the moon, and versus that Neptunian urge to bring psychic human wholeness, whether it's a physical level with food and shelter, or psychological level with bringing the psyche into wholeness. So we see with Jung's chart, for instance, he has Mercury, Venus in Cancer and the Sun in Leo, so all about delving into the needs of the human being, understanding the interior psychic realm, and then supporting the emergence of the individuation in Leo. And this is really speaking to the way in which the heart of the spiritual sun, Neptune in Cancer, serves to nourish and support the human form so that it becomes that right vessel, the good vessel for the Christ principle. So Neptune in Cancer supports the indwelling Christ principle in that sense. So that spiritual urge for cohesion and nourishment and sustenance, Neptune moving through the mother principle in Cancer. And then of course we see that come to its conclusion also with Capricorn, so that's Cancer's opposite, with these 1, 3, 7 rays, bringing that which was brought together into a wholeness and moved into a spiritual orientation, let's say in Cancer, into more of a crystallized form in the outer realm in Capricorn. So we saw Cancer individuation in Leo, of course, but then the goal of the initiate, or that which is the spiritual vision, coming to its fruition in Capricorn. That takes us to rise, fall, detriments. So we kind of already spoke about Cancer there. Neptune has its exaltation in Cancer as well, and that speaks to the urge towards universal nourishment anyway, so that can sometimes have its quality there, and just even at the personality level, similar to Jupiter, which also has an exaltation in Cancer. But, okay, so Capricorn then is where we see the fall of Neptune. And really, this is only speaking to the personality level, because the difference between the soul expression of Neptune in Capricorn is very different from the Neptune in Capricorn from the exoteric point of view. Capricorn being the dense form of bondage at the exoteric level, the lower Saturn. So the hiding of the love principle really is what happens, where we get that crystallized selfishness in Capricorn. So if we're taking the universality of Neptune, or the urge towards love, that personal love, and the sacrifice towards the whole, and we're taking it into this very selfish level of expression in Capricorn, exoterically considered, then we see the spiritual urge, the drive towards a spiritual life, and the transpersonal life experience is hidden by materiality in all of its different forms, whether that's literal materialism or the personal desires or whatever. Esoterically though, when we have a soul-centered individual expressing with Neptune and Capricorn, it's just that iteration, really, the next octave up of what we spoke of in Cancer. It's just the spiritual urge and that drive towards universality, making its the personal articulation of that universal love through the sign Capricorn, as it now expresses through the need to and the desire to cultivate a form in the outer life. So moving into those buildings of institutions, or whatever is the crystallization of and the manifestation of the spiritual urge, coming into that goal and manifesting that goal in Capricorn. So it's really night and day difference there. Detriment in another earth sign, Virgo. So this is sort of a funny one. It can be, I guess, a little bit like Venus, where we see this detriment in Virgo as well. It's the principle of objectivity, and also the love principle, as Venus expresses that exoterically, gets lost with the bits and pieces. There's something a little similar here, where the propensity towards this universality is somehow veiled by the bits and pieces in Virgo. So it can sometimes look like making a mountain out of a molehill, or making, it's just that weird emotional magnification with the 6th ray astral quality there in the solar plexus through the bits and pieces or something like that. But once again, you have to consider these things from 2 different levels of expression, because Virgo esoterically, or when we consider its rays, is a rays 2 and 6 signs, speaking to the gestating of the forms to bring all of this together. So it necessarily kind of hints at the Cancerian quality as well. So possibly a very strong placement for healing, or a way to really express the universal love principle through those Virgo processes of purification. Something like that playing out there. So something to ponder and consider. Considering its rulerships, we've really kind of touched on all of them already. Co-ruler of Pisces, exoterically, spoke about the enmeshment problem that we can see with Pisces, but then also the urge towards spiritual compassion. And when we see Neptune then pair with the esoteric ruler Pluto, we see that strong urge towards the really the battle for the spiritual self, as Pluto really kills off that which is inhibits the spiritual principle, right? So the Neptune in Pisces generation may speak to the revolution of certain spiritual ideals, are really carrying forth, let's say, the true Christian mission or something like this, very devotional, bringing that first ray quality, the will to love, the will to serve the whole, pairing up nicely there. And of course Pisces is related to Scorpio. It's the death on the mutable cross relating to the death on the fixed cross, that scorpionic death being that of the astral purification, which brings the connection to Mars there. So Neptune moving into having that affinity with Mars through, and Pluto as well. So it's the Pluto, Neptune, Mars triplicity there with Pisces, the crucifixion, the will to die and sacrifice with Pluto there, and then the urge for the personality itself to walk the path of its own death in Scorpio, and elevate out of the glamour through that intense purification there. Leo, we spoke to the heart of the spiritual sun there. It's really the spiritual oriented Leo, which becomes the conduit for the divine self, which is why Leo has such, I mean, they all have such transformations in terms of expressing esoterically, all of the signs really, but from being so all about me in this exaggerated way, Leo's actually moving into the Christ self, because Leo is the sign of the Christ on the fixed cross, right? So speaking to the knowledge of the true self and the capacity to hold that awareness of the heart, really, the connection for the heart there, and then pairing the Neptunian emotive love sixth ray quality with the rays 1 and 5 in Leo, which bring that focus of what the true self actually is, which is why we can see the good occultist or the good solar teacher, for instance, in Leo, someone who really understands the science of the soul. And then, of course, Cancer, which is speaking to the universal love, really taken to its most intimate form in Cancer, the mother of all forms, and the urge towards bringing universal love and sustenance at physiological and psychological levels, and the valuing of the human personality, the valuing of human consciousness as it's connected to the earth. Cancer being that really strong Mother Earth sign in terms of that which nourishes and brings the consciousness of the human individual. Of course, the mother actually gives birth to the form, and those early primitive years of development are so important for the foundations of the psyche. So Neptune in Cancer, away from the fear and sensitivity of the lunar Cancerian, or the hiding identification with form, the need for comfort, into that service to all, the valuing, the universal love of the human family really taken into its into substance itself, and working with the integrity of the mother principle to sustain and nurture, and once again really spiritually value the integrity of the human personality and the form, and alleviating so much of human suffering, which for still so many human beings at a global level is still connected to these basic needs not being met. The corruption of the family unit, even. We know that Christianity, connected to Pisces and Mars and Neptune, has this emphasis on the family unit, but that's actually a hint at Neptune's connection to Cancer there too, the quality of the family, how the family unit and the family principle becomes an accentuation of the universal love quality when we have a strong mother-father relationship, embodying those psychological archetypes, connecting Neptune to the god of the waters here in Cancer, and that supporting the development of the stabilized influence of the human personality, the young child's psyche as it grows up, and having everything that it needs to really develop a strong sense of core character and a good sense of rootedness in life and in earth. So it's interesting to really consider Neptune, which from an exoteric point of view can kind of be up here, and then in Cancer it's really quite intimate and very personal, and this, which is a very mystical out there quality, is very much related to the nourishment of that which is most personal in terms of the human experience and the human form itself. So when we consider Neptune, the Christians are really correct. We all must face Christ, our living Saviour. That's the universal love of God and the connection to the solar self, which, once permeating the body and connecting that sutratmic thread, does serve as this healing, purifying function, hinting at the scorpionic process there, the regeneration of the dense substance all caught up in the Maya, let's say. And we all at some point are going to have a mystical, very personal experience of Jesus Christ, the soul of God. At some point, it is non-optional. because it is exactly the deep intimacy of that personal quality, the mystical quality, that reorients the human being in terms of the astral form being deeply penetrated by universal love. It's being brought to one's knees. This is the mystical experience. When you read poetry or prayers from the Christian saints, from the Sufi mystics, Rumi, they're all hinting at that exact quality of being penetrated. It's kind of the Plutonic thing there, penetrated into the heart, and an opening into universal love, and the kind of death and the sacrifice that comes with that necessarily drives the human being out of their lower lunar and Martian identification with form and reorients them to the spiritual life. Now, as we've spoken of elsewhere, the mystical path will always end up towards the path of the occultist, because we could say that the mystical path takes us into the even ray line 246 and connecting to the interior spiritual energies of consciousness, and then at a certain point that necessarily turns back over into the odd ray line, which speaks more to that potency of substance. It's the building rays 1, 3, 5, 7. It's more concrete and focused, because necessarily the mystical path will transform the living material life into that which becomes the building function of the spiritual purpose, moving, for instance, from Cancer to Capricorn, in that sense. But just generally, the need for universal love, not just to hang out in the mystical experience, and this is where the mystics can fall into a trap there, when they just hang out in universal love or the connection with God all the time, but not seeing, okay, but what's to what end is this? How do we bring that into the everyday living of our material life? And this is where we become the occultist, and it becomes much more practical or scientific in terms of understanding exactly what the spiritual energetic forces are doing. And when we're struggling with inertia, how do we polarize into the heart center, or when does the crown and the head come into play, and all of this. But before we get there, we have to go through that mystical process. It is non-optional. So this is where Neptune reveals the heart of the spiritual sun and takes us to that spiritual self, the sacrifice, and a connecting into the universal love of all humanity.